Until recently, it was called Mohammedanism by the West, which is not only inaccurate, but offensive. Until recently. As Houston Smith continues, it is inaccurate, Muslims say, because Muhammad didn't create this religion. God did. Muhammad was merely God's mouthpiece. Beyond this, the title is offensive because it conveys the impression that Islam focuses on a man rather than on God. And so we come to our 11th week of RELS 100, looking further at the origins of Islam. Of course, the life of Muhammad is still incredibly important. Generally, that's rendered as 570 to 632 of the Common Era of the Gregorian calendar. As you'll see in just a moment, that is not the Islamic calendar. The Islamic calendar starts with the Hijra, or flight to Medina. You can see the two different spellings there in the slide. In 622 of the Common Era. That is, again, the first year of the Islamic calendar. For example, 2021 is 1442 in the Muslim calendar, which helps us to understand that when we decenter ourselves away from a Christian-centered way of looking at life, it helps to take in the perspective of how almost 2 billion people in the world view each year. Anyway, in 630, Mecca then becomes Muslim. In 632, or 10 of the Islamic year, Muhammad dies without a successor. So let's think for a second about what's happening with Muhammad. As they moved into the city, which was formerly called Yathrib, to the north of Mecca, the Muslim leaders moved to prevent a threat from the outside. 70 families left before Muhammad, and then Abu Bakr moved out to Yathrib with Muhammad. And they believed that God had ordered them to this, to this place to start a new city. It became known even more particularly as Medinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. Here's Houston Smith again. From the moment of his arrival at Medina, Muhammad assumed a different role. From prophecy, he was pressured into administration. I'm going to add, that's quite different. The despised preacher became a masterful politician. The prophet was transformed into a statesman. We see him as the master not merely of the hearts of a handful of devotees, but of the collective life of a city, its judge and general, as well as its teacher. And here is from a pamphlet cited by Prothero. Muhammad was, quote, a religious teacher, a social reformer, a moral guide, a political thinker, a military genius, an administrative colossus, a faithful friend, a wonderful companion, a devoted husband, a loving father, all in one. Of course, that's written from the perspective of appreciation from the inside, as you might say. But nonetheless, we're all going to have to take in that this is a person of world-shaping influence, which would have seemed very odd, I'm sure, if somebody had asked in 570, what is the area of Arabia going to look like in the next 50 to 60 years? So again, you can see the expanse of Islam from Muhammad's, sort of the western, southern side of Arabia. Then in the four caliphs, you see the expanse, and then all the way into Spain, Andalusia, by 750. Only stopped from going into France at the Battle of Tours in 732. Again, Houston Smith. From first to last, Muhammad resisted every impulse to inflate his own image. I never said God's treasures are in my hand, that I knew that I knew the hidden things, or that I was an angel. I'm only a preacher of God's words, the bringer of God's message to humankind. One last quote from Houston Smith before we go into the specific teachings of Islam. If signs be sought, let them not be of Muhammad's greatness, but of God's. And for these one need only open one's eyes. The heavenly bodies holding their swift, silent course in the vault of heavens. the incredible order of the universe, the rain that falls, that relieve the parched earth, palms bending with golden fruit, ships that glide across the seas laden with goods. Can this be the handiwork of gods of stone? What fool to cry for signs when creation tokens nothing else? In an age of credulity, Muhammad taught respect for the world's incontrovertible order, a respect that was to bring Muslims to science before it did to Christians. So the key again of the word Muslim is one who submits, and by submitting finds peace. William James, in his famous book from the early 1900s, The Varieties of Religious Experience, wrote this: when all is said and done, we are in the end absolutely dependent on the universe, and it is sacrifices and surrenders of some sort, deliberately looked at and accepted, we are drawn and pressed as into our own permanent positions of repose. Now, in those states of mind which fall short of religion, the surrender is submitted to as an imposition of necessity, and the sacrifice is undergone at the very best without complaint. So James is indicating that we all have to submit to the facts of the universe around us. For those who aren't religious, this is what it looks like. But now he turns to the religious life. In the religious life, on the contrary, surrender and sacrifice are positively espoused. Even unnecessary givings up are added in order that the happiness may increase. Religion thus makes easy and felicitous what in any case is necessary. Islam, as Houston Smith writes, emerges as a religion that aims at total commitment in which nothing is withheld from the divine. This explains why Abraham is by far the most important figure in the Quran, for he passed the ultimate test of willingness to sacrifice his own son, if that was required. So, a moment of reflection. What's one thing you'd like to know about Islam? What do you know specifically about the 5 pillars of Islam? Here are the 5 pillars, just listed first of all. And let me just say, this is one element of Islam that's easy to grasp. That's one reason why it does expand so quickly. It's multiplied throughout our world. First is the confession of faith, the Shahada. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Prayer or salat 5 times daily. Charity or zakat for the needs of the poor. Ramadan or San for the month of fasting, and the pilgrimage to Mecca or the Hajj. The call to prayer, Idan says this: God is great. I bear witness that there is no Lord except God. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Make haste towards prayer. Make haste towards welfare. Prayer is better than sleep. God is great. There is no Lord except God. So already in this pillar, the second pillar, we have the first one, the daily confession of faith in the seal of the prophets, the final prophet of Muhammad. Again, Houston Smith, who's so insightful and succinct in many ways. At least once during his or her lifetime, a Muslim must say the Shahada correctly, slowly, thoughtfully, aloud, with full understanding and with heartfelt conviction. In actuality, Muslims pronounce it often, especially its first half, La ilaha illallah. Though they are obviously creatures, having created neither themselves nor their worlds, they can't seem to get this straight and keep placing themselves at the center of things, living as if they were laws unto themselves. This produces havoc. When we ask them why Muslims pray, a partial answer is in response to life's natural impulse to give thanks for its existence. The deeper answer, however, is the one with which this paragraph opened: to keep life in perspective, to see it objectively, which involves acknowledging human creatureliness before its creator. So again, back to prayer 5 times a day on a rising, at noon, at mid-decline of the sun, at sunset, and before bed. Then we come to the third pillar, charity. From the Quran, second chapter, let's keep with chapter. Second chapter, 267th verse. We'll get to the Quran a little bit later. You who believe, give charitably from the good things you have acquired, and that we, meaning God, have produced for you from the earth. Do not give away the bad things that you yourself would only accept with your eyes closed. Remember that God is self-sufficient, worthy of all praise. So, throughout the years, my wife and I have tried to give, to charity. That's part of our practice, our own practice of life. And my wife currently directs a homeless ministry. And one of the things she always says to me is, if you're going to give a shirt away to homeless people, make sure it's a shirt that you would still wear. Don't give a shirt that's so ripped up or sweat stained or whatever that you wouldn't personally wear it. And I think that's what's in this verse from the Quran. Do not give away bad things that you yourself would only accept with your eyes closed. Give real charity. Give because of something that's of value. The zakat is 2.5% of wealth, not just income, and it's explicitly aimed at aiding the poor, rather not at supporting religious institutions. In the past, I've been asked about how this is distributed. So here's one example from as we've talked about, the most highest percentage of Muslims in any one country. And this is from a recent article of the UN's Development Goals. In many Islamic countries, like Indonesia, charity, or zakat, is mostly channeled informally through families and friends and uncertified charity bodies and orphanages. The National Board of Zakat, Basnas, is the official body that disperses the Islamic contribution in Indonesia. And as I mentioned, that's where some 87% of its 235 people are Muslim. Fasting. And let me say that we'll get to Ramadan in a moment. Specifically, if you email me by the end of this week 11 with the date of Ramadan and what brief description of Ramadan, you will earn 25 extra credit points. From the Quran, second chapter again, verse 183, and you can tell it's a very long chapter. As we'll find out, they go in decreasing length. So except for the first chapter, all of them go from longest to shortest. First is an introduction. From Quran 2, 183. O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed to those before you, that you may learn self-restraint. And this is, fascinating because in Muslim countries, you'll see signs, as in this supermarket. Dear customers, eating and drinking in the supermarket during fasting hours of the holy month of Ramadan is strictly prohibited. So, in that this fasting happens during summer months in the northern hemisphere. If you're way up in Scandinavian countries and you're Muslim, you're thinking about 18 or 19 hours of fasting, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It is, in fact, fasting abstinence from eating, drinking, smoking, and sexual relations. The purpose is to achieve greater taqwa, or consciousness of God. So this year, it begins Wednesday, April 11th, and ends in the evening of Tuesday, May 11th. So it gives you a sense of how rigorous this is. Finally, we get to the Hajj, the pilgrimage. The first is the ritual enactment of which centers on God, linking the Muslim, the one who follows, who submits in order to find peace to God. These are images of the pilgrimage of the Hajj around the Kaaba, around the circling of the Kaaba that happens, a time-lapse photography picture there. Photography picture, that's a funny word. Anyway, funny phrase. So, let's look at this, the Hajj guide. For Muslims, Hajj is the fifth and final pillar of Islam. It takes place in the month of Dhul Hijjah, which is the 12th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. So, the Islamic calendar is shorter, has fewer days than the Gregorian calendar. That's why they don't sync up, because it's based on the moon and not as the Gregorian calendar is that we use commonly in the United States, which is not based on a lunar calendar. Hajj and it officially begins on the 8th of Dhul Hijjah and lasts for 5 days. The Grand Mosque is where it begins. Pilgrims begin the Hajj by circling the Kaaba 7 times. And we'll see the importance, as you've seen in some of the videos, the importance should say again, you've seen the importance of the Kaaba in the history of Mecca and then also in the history of Muhammad. Second stop is at Mina to pray and read the Quran. The third stop is prayer from noon to dusk in the Arafat Valley, where the Prophet Muhammad preached his first sermon. And then at Muzdalifah, the pilgrims pick up the 49 rocks needed for the following day in Mina. The pilgrims then, in the fifth stop, throw rocks at the three pillars representing the devil, and that's the start of ritual sacrifice. So actual animal sacrifice goes on, which, just to be clear, because it's not a common experience we have, at least in the U.S. And finally, return to Makkah or Mecca, pilgrims circle the Kaaba 7 more times. And that reenacts Muhammad's farewell pilgrimage before his death in 632 of the Common Era. Where do all these Muslims come from? So back in 2017, here's a graphic. Almost 2 million Muslims from around the world will gather in Saudi Arabia's Mecca for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. The highest amount in that year, approximately 221,000 from Indonesia, Pakistan almost 180, India 170, Bangladesh 127,000. Did I say 170,000? 127,000 from Bangladesh. Egypt with about 108,000. Of course, with COVID, as I currently record this, there's all kinds of restrictions and limitations, but that gives you a sense of the maximum of how big this can be, at least recently. So final question for reflection, since most of us do not come from a Muslim background in this class, how do these 5 pillars strike you? Is there one or two which you find easier or more difficult to practice or imagine practicing?